This week, it's going to be okay to agree to disagree. Sort of. Let's get into things. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTCnews.com. Again, EWTC. It stands for Enemies Within the Church. EWTCnews.com to see the continued projects of Enemies Within the Church very, very soon, to the point where I'm saying it right now. As Judd mentioned last week, the main enemieswithinthechurch.com website is going to be redirected to Enemies Within the Church News, EWTC News. Ooh. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTCnews.com. It stands for Enemies Within the Church. EWTCnews.com to view the continued projects of Enemies Within the Church. And very, very soon, that is going to be the new place for the movie itself. So if you want... Hiccuping. Welcome to the Enemies Within the Church podcast. You can go to EWTC News. That stands for Enemies Within the Church News. EWTCnews.com to view the continued projects of Enemies Within the Church. And very, very soon, that is going to be the new hosting website for the film itself. So if you wanted to stream a copy of the film, that's how you'd get to it. The store to buy a physical copy of the film, that would be the way to get to it as well. We're in the process of merging those. By the time you listen to this episode, those might have already been. It'll just be when it'll be, depending on when you listen to this. But again, you can go to EWTCnews.com. Now, what are we talking about this week? Well, we're talking about agree to disagree. We're talking about I'm just asking questions. We're talking about I'm just trying to have a discussion. We're talking about these very related concepts, and they really come down to the same idea, which is I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm not telling you how to believe. I'm not telling you how to think. But I'm telling you how to believe. I'm telling you how to think. I'm telling you how to view this thing. It's a very common manipulation tactic. Now, I want to say a few things right up front. Can you have a conversation where it is okay to walk away with a measure of disagreement? Yes. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Is there a time when, you are legitimately just asking questions to try and learn? That last statement there should tell you a little bit about when it's okay to do that. But yeah, it's perfectly fine. Is it okay to have a discussion about something? Not with the point of trying to persuade the other side. Well, hold on there. We're going to have to define things a little bit more. In the most broad sense, yes, but there are details there that get people tripped up, that get people to lower their defenses. And that's really the primary thing that we're going to be talking about. These are all ideas that people use to get someone else to lower their defenses. Now, I believe I might have mentioned this before when we're doing the How the Woke Manipulate series. And just because of the irregularity at this point, I no longer call this the How the Woke Manipulate series. And gives us also a little bit of room to talk about more than strictly just, quote, woke usage of certain tactics. So, yeah, the series is kind of ended, but we're not going to stop talking about manipulation. It's just not going to be as regular. But I may have mentioned this before, but one of the things that drives me to care about manipulation tactics when it comes to argumentation, when it comes to trying to get someone to accept a belief that they wouldn't otherwise accept, is because that's who I was when I was younger. I was an incredibly arrogant young man. I was an incredibly arrogant teen. I used the weight of my ability to argue, to debate, to general intelligence, but it's more than that. I would, you amp things up. You use the weight of perceived intelligence. It's not actually about actual intelligence. You use the perceived intelligence to dominate your opponent. Dominate your opponent. To the point where you can get your opponent to start advocating for a position they don't actually believe in without them even realizing it, manipulate that to the point where they're then functionally arguing for your original point, and then concede the argument to them. You've now subtly shifted their way of thinking on a topic without them even noticing. And it will affect them down the line. So manipulation is a very powerful thing. Intellectual bullyism just infuriates me. And that's using the weight of perceived intelligence, weight of perceived superiority on a topic to try and dominate the other person and force them to accept what you are presenting. Frustrating. You see it all over the place. This is one of the reasons that anyone that's listening, you shouldn't just accept something that you're told. You shouldn't just accept something that you're told, because there are a lot of people out there that are trying to manipulate you, and that's a very dangerous thing, because the whole purpose of manipulation is for you to not notice it. Is for you to not notice that it's happening. If you're noticing it's happening, then it fails as manipulation. So there are a lot of tactics that we have talked about in the past. There's a lot of tactics that we should talk about in the past. And if you're curious about something, if you have a piece of content, some sort of teaching, a video, audio, whatever it is, a written article, whatever it is, and you look at it and you go, this feels wrong. This feels wrong, but I cannot, I can't put my finger on exactly where it's going wrong. I can see certain details. I can see certain things. I know that it's wrong. I could talk about that, but just there's a general idea here that gives me that feeling of offness, that shoots up the red flags, but I can't see how they're doing it. What the tactics actually are. Send that to me. I would love to break things down for you and help you see where they are injecting, or not even just where, more of the how they're injecting the error and how they're trying to bypass your defenses. And one of the things they want to do, anyone that's trying to manipulate you, they want to suppress that feeling of unease when you hear something that is wrong, but you're struggling to put the details onto why. What are the specific details it's wrong? I can see little errors in it, but the whole argument, the argument itself, I can't break it down. They want to suppress that, and then, we've talked about this before, use benefit of the doubt to get you the rest of the way. But we're talking about this week, we're talking about, again, the agree to disagree, we're just having a conversation, I'm just asking questions, those very similar ideas. And we're going to look at a few clips. We're going to talk about many things. We're going to look at a few clips. If you haven't watched the episode 2 weeks ago on Preston Sprinkle's view of hell, first, you should just go listen to that in general. That was a phenomenal episode. My goodness, I put so much work into that to try and give you just a very broad overview, a very detailed look at what are Preston's views of hell. And if you think, oh, well, I don't really care what Preston's views are, they're not isolated to him. And he says, we looked at in that episode, he's talking about the spread of his views and his hopefulness to see them spread. They are. But it goes so far beyond simply just, hey, he has this specific view of hell and it is off. You need to go listen to the episode. But one of the things he did in there was exactly what we're talking about. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm not trying to change your position. I'm not saying you have to accept my view. I'm not saying you have to abandon the traditional view. But so on and so forth. Here are the reasons why you're wrong. Now, it really comes down to wording. He didn't say, here are the reasons why you're wrong, but there was a but, and here's the reasons, the evidence for my position. I'm going to argue persuasively that you should adopt my view. Does he get it passed simply because he said somewhere in there, oh, well, you don't have to adopt my view? Well, don't have to is different than I'm trying to change you. Yeah, certainly, you don't have to. He's not holding a gun to your head, but he is trying to get you to change. So if you want to see a example of this in action, go listen to that episode. Phenomenal episode. There's kind of multiple sections to it, so you don't think that you have to sit down a one sitting, listen to the whole thing. It is longer, but I think it's excellent. Go listen to it. But what is the general concept? We need to lay out the general concept. Then we're going to look at some clips. And the clips we're going to look at come from Gavin Ortlund. And this is the infamous, if you followed the Megan Basham versus Gavin Ortlund situation that developed after the release of Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale. This is the infamous video that Megan referenced in her book, and then Gavin tried to defend. But I want to point out, people have talked about the content. I mentioned this when we looked at some of the other things around this situation. Other people have really gone into the content. And I do think there would still be value in us here going into the content as well. I think we gave a nice perspective on it, but I don't necessarily see that as a need when there are so many other things that we can talk about with this podcast. But I do want to look at the manipulative aspects of things, because whether his view is true or not is very important, but the way he's trying to go about it is very important as well. And it goes to trustworthiness. Should we listen to Gavin in particular when he brings up a topic if he's willing to be manipulative? That's one of the points that I tried to get across the last time we looked at that the Gavin versus Megan situation. But again, this is going to be looking at that infamous video in particular, because I found it to be a bit of an egregious example of the idea of agree to disagree, the idea of you can come to a different conclusion. Now, what are they trying to do? Obviously, they're trying to get you to adopt their position. In this case, Gavin is trying to get you to adopt his position. It's persuasive argumentation. Now, we don't have the time to look at the entire video, so you are going to have to take what I say with a minor grain of salt, but I'm going to link the video below so you can go listen to the whole thing. But the style of communication he's employing is persuasive argumentation. He's trying to give you facts. He's trying to give you reasons, details. He's trying to show the correctness of his side, that he is coming from a position of truth. And thus, what does that make you? If he is coming from a position of truth, you are coming from a position of untruth. You're coming from a false view, and his view is the right view. So again, it is persuasive argumentation. Whenever you are presenting your side and you're saying, this is a correct view, doesn't matter if you say, I believe it's correct, I think it's correct, you're still presenting it as a correct view, even if there are caveats. So you're saying, here is the correct view, and here are the reasons to believe it. That's argumentation. That's an attempt to persuade you. So that's one of the things that you've got to get out of the way right off the bat. We're talking about when people are trying to get you to move from one position to another. Now, that right there should answer 90% of the questions. But, one thing I will put out there, yes, this podcast is persuasive. I am trying to get you to adopt my position because I believe it's correct. I believe what I'm saying is true. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it's true. And I want to have reasons for why I believe what I believe. And I want to give those reasons to you. I want to give you evidence you can look at. Again, it's why that Preston Sprinkle episode on his view of hell is as long as it is, because I'm trying to give you evidence, reasons, things you can verify. That's the biggest difference, is I'm trying to give you the evidence that I looked at so you can verify it. Now, yes, again, talking about Gavin in particular, he does recommend resources. But that's after he's made his persuasive argumentation, and it's not, hey, here are quotes, here are the details, here's this information, I'm presenting it to you as I found it along my journey of understanding this. It's, I made a persuasive argumentation, persuasive argument, I brought you to my side, now here's where you can go to listen to opinions that then confirm this new belief. Now, there's a subtle difference between the two of trying to give you simply just evidence that you can verify and trying to give you resources that are about confirming in you specifically the argument that you've already adopted. Especially when you're going over a broader topic, you do need to present context of both sides, and that's one thing we're going to look at. So I think it's probably worth looking at the clips now. And what I want to say, setting the stage for this, again, this comes from that video, and it's the first about 15 minutes of the video that I pulled some clips from. There are other things of note in the video. I just wanted to get you kind of the early parts, because that's where this manipulative tactic is established. And then as the video goes further and further, he starts to drift more and more away from that as he's, it's a situation of, once I've got the clause in, I don't need to be as subtle. But what's the context of this video? If you don't know, it's a video about Gavin Ortlund from 2022, where he is arguing for climate change. And because he defines what he means when he says climate change, he's talking about man-made, alarmist climate change. He differentiates that from just textbook climate change, which destroys one of his arguments 100%. Because if you don't know, climate change is a real thing. It's a real term. It describes the change of climates over time. And we know that God made a wonderful planet that is an active system. It does shift and change and move. Climates do shift around. They go up in temperature, they go down. There's periods of more ice, there's periods of less ice, there's periods of cataclysm, when some cataclysmic event might happen that'll alter things, but then the Earth is a system that is self-regulating, is able to heal. So climate change, the fact that climates change over time, is very real. This is one of the biggest bait and switches if you didn't know about that. What people are talking about is the relabeling of global warming into man-made alarmist climate change, because they are piggybacking off of a real term to then inject their specific view. I want to say more on that, but again, this is mostly about the manipulation. You do need that context. That is important to know what he means when he says climate change. We're actually going to get to that part of the video, but let us start to look at some of this. So this is the right off the bat, the very introduction of the video. Because I want you to have the context. And it starts right at the beginning.
My YouTube channel is mainly focused on apologetics and theology and things like that. But in this video, I want to talk about the issue of climate change. There's always a little bit of challenge in speaking to issues that touch into the realm of politics and culture, especially with how polarized our culture is, especially for me as an evangelical pastor. So I wrestle with, as I'm studying various other issues, when is it helpful to speak to something and when isn't it?
So I just want to point out with that first little section, he's establishing that, hey, this is something different than what I normally talk about. And that is important for a few different reasons. If you want to broach a more difficult topic, establishing it as, hey, this is something different that we're going to talk about, is a common piece of framing. But let's continue on and listen to what he says now.
Goal is, amidst all the disintegration, trying to help people, come back to basics and rebuild and so forth. On the other hand, I also think it's important not to avoid issues just because they're controversial. I'm not very good at that anyway, and this issue is so important to me. I think about it every day. It's very much on my heart, and I study it, and I'm really interested in it. And I just feel that we can't avoid things. We have to learn how to have conversations about difficult topics. In fact, I think part of how we can commend the gospel, those of us who are Christians, is by having conversations about issues where we may disagree and doing so in a respectful, charitable way, because that is so countercultural right now. And so I'm just going to speak to this because I care about it so much. I think we can't not talk about it. It's just too important, and I want to be true to my convictions and kind of, I don't know, there's something freeing about just saying, I don't have to be right and I don't have to be perfect, but I have to do my best to follow my convictions and not let the perceived consequences be the most important thing. So I want to talk about climate change.
So there are multiple things there. And since we're already talking about manipulation, we're already talking about the agree to disagree, just having conversation, you probably already picked up on a lot of it. Things I want to point out in the Christian context: gospel. You attach things to the gospel. Well, once he attaches it to the gospel, he has a huge burden. Huge burden. You have to back that up. Why do people like to connect things to the gospel, especially when they're talking about something that might be perceived as controversial? Why do they do it with things that might be perceived as controversial? Well, then you can't avoid it. And that's some of the things he said in there. He's trying to use language of, we can't not talk about this. This is important. It's so important. I think about it every single day. And then connect it to the gospel. He's trying to establish this idea that it's unavoidable. And in a type of way that if you do avoid it, you are betraying the gospel. That's the functional outcome of what he said there. That's the functional outcome. If you go against this, you go against talking about this. Talking about this. That's the key right now. We're talking about it. If you're not willing to talk about it, you're betraying the gospel. Again, that's a huge burden. You got to look out for language like that, because he's establishing this as a necessary conversation. Christians must talk about it. You do not have a choice. Suddenly, his topic is unavoidable. Unavoidable. So at this point already, here's an open question. Are we just having a conversation? Are we just having a conversation? Is there room to agree to disagree? Well, on that second part, technically still, because you could have the conversation and then disagree, but he's already attached it to the gospel. If it's just a conversation and you come to the conclusion that it's wrong, well, then how is the gospel implicated in any of this? But let's continue on.
To talk about these things, even because that's one of the things that motivates this video. So often we just don't have these conversations.
You see there again, he's talking about the idea we have to have these conversations. So many times we don't have these conversations. There's an unwillingness. Now, again, he's repeating certain things over and over again, and it's going to be repeated over and over again, but there's an implication being built that if you are unwilling to have this conversation, then you are wrong. Automatically, you are then put in a category of wrong, even without, the truth of the matter being established. Sorry about that. Got a phone call. But it leads us to a point where you are wrong from the get-go. You are wrong from the get-go. It puts himself in a position where he is up here. His argument is up here. His position's up here. And you're down here. For those listening, I think you can get the picture. Down here, you're way lower, and his argument is way higher. It establishes a disparity in the conversation. So, yeah, you might just be having a conversation. You might have the ability to agree to disagree, but there's this gap. You're not arguing on equal footing. You're not having a conversation on equal footing. The disagreement now puts you in a low position, a dangerous position. It's building an idea that makes you ignorant if you disagree with him. If you do not believe me, let's keep going. And, again, test what I'm saying. Does it match? Does it match? But let's keep going.
Christians should care about environmental issues like climate change. And I would even say that of all different people, Christians should especially care. Is one that should naturally incline us to care about issues of stewardship and sustainability and responsible usage of resources and things like that. It's right there in our creational mandate. It's so significant that when God makes human beings, there is that phrase. It's not just that we're made in God's image. The immediate follow-through is let them have dominion. Now, we can debate what that means, but there's this clear charge of stewardship over creation.
We see there, now, we as Christians have this, which he's right. He's right about this. We should, on every issue, every topic in this world, we should be the ones that care the most. And I do mean every topic. Well, are you saying then we should take everything seriously? Well, yeah, we should take it seriously. I think we should take communism seriously. I think we should take Marxism seriously. I think we should take cultural Marxism seriously because they're serious threats. We need to understand them in the sense we need to understand what the Bible says, be firmly rooted in that, compare it to these other ideologies and go, here's the reasons why those are wrong and dangerous. Yes, we should care about every issue. We should care about the environment. We were given dominion of this earth. We are its caretakers. We are the ones that God set in his garden, in his world, to tend it. But we're also given dominion over it. We're not just here as passive lower stewards with the earth above us. No, we are the caretakers over nature. We can abuse that. This is God's world, not ours. So yeah, we can abuse that. So yeah, we need to have good stewardship of things. Yeah, it agitates me when I see people, toss gross garbage on the side of the road. And why? I don't care if you're in the city or the country. I don't want that on my sidewalk when I'm walking downtown. I don't want that on the side of the road when I'm driving along. I don't want it in the woods when I'm hiking. Be respectful. But that's a far, 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 far cry from man-made alarmist climate change. Because throwing trash around versus mankind's existence is destroying the planet are two separate categories. One has to be proven. One has a much larger degree of proof. But the other thing is, no, I should stop responding to his arguments as much. But the manipulation part, he just attached it now to Genesis. He keeps attaching it to more and more biblical commands, to the gospel, Genesis, so on and so forth. We're getting to a point where the only thing he hasn't linked it to is loving your neighbor.
Second of all, the basic principle of love your neighbor, that applies to how we think about our children, our grandchildren, future generations. And then there's just basic principles that all Christians believe in that play into an issue like climate change, wisdom in planning for the future, opposition to greed, contentment and valuing simplicity and modesty of lifestyle. You think of Proverbs 38, which says, "Give me neither poverty nor riches." There's nothing in our theology that would discourage us from being, in principle, open to these kinds of issues. Even throughout the scripture, you think about one of the things that's so interesting. I wrote a blog post about this one time, just how much the scripture teaches that God cares about animals.
Okay, so yeah, he does link it to loving your neighbor, and he also links it to several other things as well. Again, are we getting a picture of someone that we are allowed to disagree with? Are we getting a picture of someone that's saying, hey, we are on equal ground here, and we can agree to disagree? I'm just trying to present some information, and you can make of that what you will. Or is he presenting his side as ever elevated versus you? You are lowly person if you disagree. He is enlightened person because he has the gospel on his side. He has Genesis on his side. He has the law on his side. Love neighbor. He has so on and so forth. But then he keeps doing the thing of connecting it to something else. He's trying to distract you from what's going on by connecting it to other things, like, well, God cares about the animals. This is just like God caring about the animals. Well, yeah, of course God cares about the animals. He cares about all creation. I'm glad that he does. But what does that have to do with climate change? What is wisdom and planning for the future? Well, yeah, if radical alarmist climate change is true, that wouldn't actually even matter, because the logic behind it is, I mean, how many times have we crossed over the point of no return, supposedly? Which goes to other things. But you see it again, he's establishing that idea over and over again. Hey, you got to be open to these conversations. Nothing in our theology says we can't be open to these conversations. Well, what's the conversation? This is an important thing. What's the conversation? Is climate change, man-made alarmist climate change, is it true or not? Or is the conversation, here are reasons to believe in climate change? Because he's presenting one of those two, but not both. Now, which one of those two do you think he's arguing for? If he's giving reasons for a position, which one do you think he's arguing for? Let's continue on a little bit.
But just our orienting posture towards issues like climate change should not be closed off. Now, so what I want to propose is that the particular reason why American evangelicals, so Christians in my context, people in my circles tend to be very skeptical or apathetic or cautious about an issue like climate change. And what I'm trying to do here at the start is say, I don't think that's anything endemic to our theology. I think it's more cultural, political, and social factors. And there's lots there that we could mention, but I think the main thing is just in the United States in recent decades, though not back in earlier times, issues of environmental stewardship and particularly climate change have been associated with political liberalism, and evangelicals have tended to be politically conservative. And I think that is the biggest single factor for why more Christians aren't more active in kind of leading the charge on something like climate change. I don't think there's anything theologically that would discourage us from caring about an issue like this.
So you see there, again, he links it to theology supports me. Theology supports talking about climate change, or more so, again, hearing out the positive arguments for climate change. But if you aren't open to those things, well, it's because it isn't theologically motivated. It's socially motivated. It's politically motivated. Well, I mean, one of the things I just have to ask is substantiate your claims. This is one of the things to look at. Is he just simply having a conversation? He's inviting you to a conversation, but then he's already making claims as he's establishing. This is the key thing. This is where this type of manipulation comes in. It comes in when you're establishing the point. Has he got into any actual content yet? I mean, again, I've cut out sections, and we're already 4.5 minutes in. And that's of the clips. So, is he, what is he prepping you for? He's really focusing in on this idea that you must have this conversation. You can't not. If you do, then you're agreeing with the gospel, with the law, with the Bible. If you don't, then you're basing that off of political and social things. So is there any room for disagreement? Is there? Again, I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know. Do you think I'm being overly harsh on that or not? Do you think there's room presented so far, just in his introduction, to actually have room to agree to disagree? Or is he poisoning the well? Is he poisoning the well in his introduction? Let's look at a little bit more.
There's nothing that should make us not open to considering this. And I guess to get to the point here on this first point, I'm just deeply burdened that many people come to this super strong opinion about climate change, just as they do on other social and cultural issues, without having studied it. Not based on the evidence, but based on the socio-political associations of the issue.
Here's the thing. Could I not, again, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Could I not say the same thing about people that do believe in climate change? He's already said that it's associated with a very specific socio-political outlook on things. So couldn't I say the same thing about him? It's one of those arguments, those points of logic that are actually completely irrational because they're ungrounded. What I mean there is you can flip it either direction and it works the same. I can point it back at him just as much as he could point it at me. So ultimately, it's not an argument. It doesn't get you anywhere. You will notice those kinds of... Do that. As you hear people present an argument, especially if it's one that you go, I don't feel like this is correct, take some of their points and do that. Flip them around. Are they just using rhetoric? Or are they actually making factual things you can sink your teeth into? But he's establishing this idea that if you do not believe, accept his position, that you are lower. I don't know how you could get around that. Let's continue on. Now, you're going to notice, you probably already noticed, that we've covered him saying the same points over and over again. Yes, again, that's a tactic of this. You repeat the same thing. You get these ideas. Repetition is important because it gets into a thought into people's minds. You have to hear something multiple times. So he's trying to drill these points in before he gets to content. Let's continue on.
All I'm trying to say here is at the beginning is to make an appeal that there's nothing that in principle should make us close-minded about this. On the contrary, our theology should make us eager to steward well over the environment.
See, again, same thing. There's no reason we can't have this conversation. Oh, and it's my position is linked to the Bible.
And I just want to make an appeal to my evangelical friends to give this issue an open mind, because as I've done that over the last 15 years now, gosh, I'm getting older, I've been struck by the impressiveness of the evidence and the importance of the issue. That's my second point. The basic science behind climate change makes a lot of sense. Now
He's making appeals for you to believe a position. Again, is that simply just having a conversation? He's also making an appeal now to the science. Well, what science? The science is not a real thing. There is no such thing as the science, unless you're talking about some of the religious ideas that have been embedded around, quote, science in our modern evolutionary atheistic world, although that's been giving way to neo-paganism. But unless she's talking about that, there's no such thing as the science. Science is a process. I know some people use that saying, oh, science is a process. They use it kind of ignorantly or abusively, but it really is. It's a process for studying and understanding the world. So there is no the science. There is simply science. Now, what can we learn from those processes is important. It's the conclusions that are important. Now, the conclusions can be flawed. Then you have to ask, okay, well, is this a truthful conclusion? Does it correspond with reality? And the 20th century has unfortunately been was a century of failed science, because the science was bent. It was all about proving certain assumptions, not hypotheses, but assumptions. And so we saw adjustments time after time after time. And that's one of the things that was funny about something you said earlier, that there didn't used to be this divide on climate and climate change, environment. When? Climate change is a very novel thing. When, again, man-made alarmist global warming, climate change is a very novel, very new thing. Go ask anyone who's 50 years or older, hey, what was the way the world was going to end, the climate catastrophe, when you were young? Oh, it was the next ice age. We're causing the next ice age. That was the thing. Especially in the 70s, that was the thing. We're ushering in the next ice age. Temperatures are falling rapidly. So when you stop and think about what he's doing, okay, whoa, Gavin. Why are you appealing to the science? Why are you appealing to, what science makes sense? There's no agreed upon science in this area, but let's continue on. I'm getting slightly distracted by trying to respond to the climate change angle of things. So let's continue on.
So you can go back to times, I think it was like around 50 million years ago. There's basically no ice anywhere. And you've got, islands near the North Pole with huge trees, and the annual mean temperature at the North Pole 50 million years ago is 60 degrees Fahrenheit.
So I wanted to put that in there because he's exposing something. We're right at the end of what we're going to look at, but he's exposing something with that. He talked about, there's nothing in theology, nothing in our Bible that says we can't have conversations. We can't accept these ideas. Because if you have the conversation and you're presenting arguments for the idea, well, you're saying functionally that there's nothing theologically that says we can't accept these ideas. Well, he's exposing there that there's a foundation that these ideas rest upon. They require the quote scientific consensus, the one, at least the one he's appealing to, requires a specific world view, and that is an evolutionary worldview, that we can measure time in millions and billions of years. So right off the bat, if you're a young earth creationist, gone is the theological possibility. So yeah, there are bits of theology that do come into play before we can even talk about climate change. You have to go, what is the theological framework? What does the Bible say about this earth? That's where you have to start. Notice that. He just wants to have a conversation, but he's starting the conversation at a much further along point. And he has assumptions. For him, the assumption is that one, the earth is millions and millions and millions of years old at the minimum. That two, we can know the exact conditions millions and millions of years ago, which as people have pointed out over time, that goes beyond empirical science. We cannot know those things via the scientific method. You're getting into the realm of different study methods at that point. Ones that are very questioned, ones that give very different results. But the point is, he's revealing here that there was a framework that he's operating within, a theological framework and a philosophical framework, scientific framework, whatever term you want to put on it. That's kind of the debate at the current moment, but just putting that out there. He's operating under certain assumptions, both when it comes to the Bible and outside of the Bible, that his argumentation rests upon. Why wasn't that the starting point? Why isn't the starting point, hey, what does the Bible say about the environment? No, he's going, and again, you can verify me because we're just pulling clips from the first, said about 15 minutes of the video, just the introduction to establish things. But has he made a biblical argument, or is he appealing to just general things? Hey, the Bible, you should care because the Bible, the gospel, the law. And then when he's giving anything of, I mean, we're still in that substance, but he's bringing in the science. Let's watch this one last little clip just to round things out.
Number one, it's just good to observe, first of all, that there is pretty much a scientific consensus, or a very close to a scientific consensus on human-caused climate change as a very real problem.
That is a massive statement to prove. It's one that's been hotly contested all over the place, especially from the scientists that disagree. Many influential, important scientists that have disagreed. But even among that, quote, consensus, well, we're not talking about climate change. We're talking about man-made alarmist climate change. And the second you make that distinction, you abandon that consensus in two ways. One, because now you've eliminated many people who even might see man-made climate change but don't see it as alarmist. All of those are gone. The people that the scientists that believe in textbook climate change but don't believe in man-made climate change, they're gone. Where's your consensus now? But the other thing, then you get into that remaining group and you have to go, okay, well, now there's hundreds of different opinions. Why are we constantly hearing from one side saying we've got a year left, one saying no, we lost it years and years ago, so on and so forth? There's radically different opinions. So it's an appeal to consensus, an appeal to authority. But again, that's him actually getting into the content. We watched the introduction. We saw him start to get into the content, but you could hopefully see how establishing that idea of you must have this conversation, you must do this because of the gospel, because of Genesis, because of love your neighbor, so on and so forth. You must have this conversation. You must look at the positive evidence for this thing. But then once he gets into it, is he actually getting into the evidence, or is he appealing to things like authority and consensus? Is there any real hard-hitting facts and information? Further on in there, he makes the claim that if you're pro-life, you must claim about, or you must look into climate change. It's a pro-life issue, or at least he connects it to it being a issue comparable to being pro-life. Now, if you don't believe me that he's just trying to have a conversation, maybe you think, oh, well, the whole point was to be persuasive, and he's acknowledging that. No, he's not. In his responses to Megan's book, he makes it clear that he's just having a conversation. For one example, just reading a couple tweets. For anyone reading along, this is in response to someone pointing out some of the issues that of that video we just looked at. For anyone reading along, I said it's especially important for Christians to care about the environment because of the Genesis 1 mandate, not make policies for climate change. Watching the video will confirm. He's appealing back to his establishing of, well, I'm just trying to have a conversation. I'm just trying to show the importance of the conversation. What's more, he's also said in response to some questions about this video, the whole point of my video here, would you not say that what we looked at, you can go verify me, but if that was the introduction and it was as long as it was, would you not say that we saw him establish the point? Or at least he went through his introduction, where the point should be established. But compare it to this. Compare what we looked at to this. The whole point of my video was we should not politicize climate change. Would you say that that was the point of his video? Again, it's simply to point out that he's arguing that this video was not just to teach you to accept climate change. No, it was don't politicize things. No, it's just getting a conversation started. No, it's this, that. It's all distractions. Now, what can we do about that? What can we do? Because this is the big thing we want is, what can we do about that? What we can do is, again, like I said, pull out things and flip them around, see if they work. But when it comes specifically to defending against, I'm just trying to have a conversation, we'll just look for that. Look for them saying, hey, it's okay to disagree on this. Hey, I'm just trying to present you some information, just trying to talk about this. I'm just trying to ask questions about this difficult topic. Once you hear stuff like that, throw up red flags in your mind. Go, okay, I'm going to keep listening to this, but I'm going to be on the lookout. I'm going to be on the lookout for more things like this. Are they giving me content, or are they trying to poison the well of this conversation? Shift things, establish a disparity between their position and my position. Make it to where it should be, because one of the things functionally, oh, you're just someone who doesn't have the theological basis for their belief. You're just doing it because of social political things. I have theology behind me. I have the gospel. I have the law. I have these things. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean if you disagree with him? Well, you should be embarrassed if you disagree. You should be embarrassed if you're not willing to look at his evidence. That's the important thing, because he controls the conversation. So it's not even simply just having a conversation. It's you're having his conversation. And that is probably the most critical fact to note. They're going to get you to have their conversation, not a conversation. Beyond that, it's very hard to have a conversation via a video that you're giving to someone else. There isn't really that back and forth. Conversation requires back and forth. Yeah, I've asked for engagement on this. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear what you think about some of the questions I posed. But I understand that's not a substitute for conversation. We can have a conversation under this podcast in comments, but this podcast itself is not a conversation. I'm telling you things. That's the reality of communication in this sort of format. Anyway, I hope this was useful. I hope this gave you some things to think about. I hope this gave you triggered some thoughts in your mind to go, hey, I think I've seen that before. And I think I'm going to be on the lookout a little bit more. Now, one thing I want to point out, this is not just, hey, there's someone on the left doing this. There's someone who's woke doing this. There's someone who's progressive doing this. There's someone who's, so on and so forth that's doing this. Notice it anywhere and everywhere. And when you see it on your side, call it out. We want facts and information. We want to present people truth. And sometimes people slip into things like this unintentionally. But it's got to be called out, wherever it is, no matter whose side it's on. So I hope this has been useful. I hope this has been helpful. One thing I want to remind you of is you can go to the Patreon linked in the description of this video to support the podcast. The podcast is, when I was in the church, we're working on other larger projects. Don't have the funds to direct the podcast itself. So if you really do like this podcast, if you do want to see it continue, we need your help at the moment to make sure that it is a viable use of time. But hope this has been helpful. And remember, don't go woke.